For historical context and more information, see the description below.
It was Smythe, the British explorer, who said, "There's some quality in a hill which defies analysis. Call it the spirit of the hill, call it anything you like. But no one has yet explained why it is that hills have a power over men, why artists and poets find in them fit subjects for their artistry and poetry." End of quote. Freeze, there a man with soul so dead who doesn't realize just what Smythe was talking about. It may be in the fact that they have this ability to make us to lift up our eyes. It may be in their changelessness, which suggests eternity to us. It may be that the steep slopes suggest challenge. But whether it be these things or many more, the fact is that there's a mystic quality to them. Never was I more aware of it than in the Holy Land. I shall never forget that evening when, driving in from Jerusalem airport, suddenly the city itself came into view like a mighty cluster of jewels on a hilltop. One thrilled to the majesty of it, and I found my mind going back to the Psalms, going back to some great Old Testament passages, and seeing in my mind's eye that great line of pilgrims that made their way up that same hillside to the temple. There were others than pilgrims that climbed there. One saw also in his mind's eye the army of the Romans, of the Mohammedans, of the Crusaders, of the siege that went on before Jerusalem through so many centuries. And one saw also that group of people making their way up that hillside to stand and watch three men being crucified on a hilltop. The Holy Land is a great land for hills and mountains. Some of them, of course, are nothing but hills. Some of them are quite high. But all of them have this mystic quality, and all of them have a great history. There is Mount Horeb. There's the Mount of Olives, the Mount of Transfiguration, Mount Sinai, Mount Zion. How meaningful they all were to Bible people. So many great things took place on the summit of them. And so it was a very natural thing that the psalmist should at least have one psalm in which he was saying, "I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills." At the same time, he understood that his help did not come from them. We've become accustomed in this early portion of the 121st Psalm not to follow up with a statement, but with a question mark. "I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help?" And then the statement that my help cometh from the Lord. The traveler needs this assurance. He needs to know that God cares. The Sphinx, for instance, symbolizes wisdom, and Frederick Myers, the poet, was once asked, what would be the question that he would put to the Sphinx if he had only one question to ask? And he said his question would be, is the universe friendly to man? I imagine a good many of us would ask that question. Life is so much of the unknown. It is so much trouble in it. There are so many cruel turns in the road, and to stand up under it, we need to know not just whether or not this universe is friendly, we need to know if there really is a personal God and if God really cares. Time and again, I imagine, we find ourselves wanting the assurance that came from that old gospel hymn that we scarcely ever hear sung today, the 90 and 9. Some of you more old-timers recall it. Lord, thou hast here thy 90 and 9. Are they not enough for thee? But the shepherd made answer, this of mine has wandered away from me. And although the road that he sought is steep, I go to the desert to find my sheep. But none of the ransomed ever knew how deep were the waters crossed, nor how dark was the night that the Lord passed through ere he found his sheep that was lost. Be helpful if we knew that we've a God that cares like that, wouldn't it? The psalmist says that we do. He will not suffer our feet to be moved. He that keepeth thee will not slumber. So the old gentleman asked how in his 90s he was able to go to sleep at night and sleep right through from early evening until morning. And he said that long ago he had believed the words that the Lord neither slumbers nor sleeps, and there's no point in both of us staying awake. He that keepeth Israel doesn't fall asleep. Now there's significance in that word Israel in the psalm, because it's saying that God is taking care of the whole people, and the promise that was given to all the people of Israel is also true for individual persons. He was not only giving assurance to a people, he was giving assurance to individuals in their need. The Lord is thy keeper, the Lord is thy shade or thy protection on thy right hand. This means, of course, that protection was being given from the southward, because the traveler was traveling to the east, and the southward was to his right, and the sun could be unbearably hot from there. So he gave shade from the right. And by the moon by night, there were those who feared the moon in those days, not only as some do today for romantic reasons, but because they believed that there was a relationship between certain diseases and phases of the moon. This persisted for many centuries. The Lord would preserve them from all the evil that would come from such things. And of course, the crux of the entire psalm is in the last verse. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in from this time forth and even forevermore. God cares like that, says the psalmist. Among the religious customs of the Orthodox Jews of our day, there is one that has to do with what is known as the mezuzah. It goes back to the book of Deuteronomy, where Moses was interpreting the law to his people. And he said, these words which I command to thee this day shall be in thine heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thine hand, and they shall be as frontlets between thine eyes, and thou shalt write them upon the posts of thine house and on thy gate. Now the Orthodox Jews and some of the Jews who are not so Orthodox have taken those words very literally. They've written them in a parchment roll, inserted it in a metal case, and they have placed it on the right side of the door of their homes. This they call the mezuzah. And the significance is that God is going to be with them when they leave their homes, and he is going to be there when they return again. We can think of these words as covering the whole journey of life, can we not? So much of life is a matter of going out. And we think of this going out principally as it is related to our young people, as it is related to youth. When one is young, the years on this earth seem to stretch interminably into the future. One imagines himself going on from strength to strength. And there are times when he may feel that in his great strength he is sufficient for all that life is going to bring to him. But happy is he who learns in those younger years that God is a refuge and he is a strength and he does watch over us. Don't do it now. But when you go home, examine a $1 bill. You will see a pyramid above which is an eye. This pyramid on the $1 bill stands for society, our little groups, our nation, our humanity. And the eye stands for the all-pervading scrutiny of God. Now you will see two Latin inscriptions, one pretty much at the top of the pyramid, one in the lower section. And the words are significant. The top one says, he nods approval on our beginnings. And then at the bottom, it says, the new order of the century. Did you know that all that was on a $1 bill? I'm afraid a good many of the secularists who are trying to do away with all kinds of religious emphasis in schools and in everything else haven't looked very closely at it either. And we don't know how long this is going to stay on a $1 bill after they do discover it. But while it is there, it's a great thing as a reminder of the faith of our fathers, and that these fathers did recognize that there is a God over us. And it's a great thing, too, on this symbol of materialism to have that which is spiritual, reminding us of the spiritual resources that God has given to us. And so I say especially to the young people, even though you come to that place where you may feel that you are sufficient unto yourselves, the time is coming when you will not be. The time is coming when some kind of blow or some kind of hill that has to be climbed is going to confront you. And you're going to reach out and find a spiritual strength to guide you through, or you're not. And what happens to your life from then on is going to depend very largely on how deep your spiritual resources are. In the Pickwick Papers, there's a scene in which Mr. Pickwick says to Sam Weller that he's quite a philosopher. Sam says, it runs in the family, I believe, sir. My father's very much like that now. If my mother-in-law blows him up, he whistles. She flies in a passion and she breaks his pipe. He steps out and gets another. Then she screams very loud and falls into hysterics, and he smokes very comfortably till she comes to again. Now that's philosophy, sir, ain't it? Mr. Pickwick replied that at least it's a very good substitute for it. Well, one can go on for a lot of life without much of a philosophy. When everything is going well, one doesn't need it too much. The time comes when we can't drift with the tide and we can't make it go of it alone, and sometimes we find ourselves clutching frantically for help. How well a minister knows it. How difficult it is for him starting from scratch with people that should have started long ago in this course and trying to bring them to the place where they can find these spiritual resources and feel the support of this help underneath the realization that God does care. I like that illustration in the Old Testament of the eagle that is teaching the eaglet how to fly. First of all, she destroys the nest. And she takes the little eaglet on her back and she sets off into space, and then when she gets up high enough, she turns and makes a flutter of the wing, and the eaglet falls off, and he goes screeching and screaming down towards the earth, but he never gets there. The mother comes around and swoops under and catches it again, and then goes up to the height and does it all over again. And she does this until the eaglet has learned to fly. All the time it's as if she were saying to it, this is a difficult problem you're facing, young man, but I'm going to be here in the midst of it. God's like that. It's a great thing to know early. He doesn't save us from problems. He merely helps us in the midst of them. He doesn't make life easy for us, but he does make life worthwhile. Even though there are times when in our cynicism and our criticism that we feel that if we had the making of this world, we certainly could make a world with a lot less trouble in it, we can't get away from the fact that the best people that we have known are people that have gone through some kind of hell. Not only the ones we have known, but the ones that have come through history. So it is that a deaf Beethoven seems to give an extra majesty to his music. So it is that Milton in his blindness gave us poetry that was just a bit richer, and another blind man, George Matheson, was able to write, "O joy that seekest me through pain, I cannot close my heart to thee. I trace the rainbow through the rain, and know the promise is not vain that morn shall tearless be." A blind man wrote that. Sometimes you see God's care isn't in the form of removing one from his burden or his burden from one. Sometimes he just moves in to help a person so that he can write something like that. And every future generation reads it and feels a blessing. So it's good when we're starting out in the journey to know God. And I repeat it especially for you college people, to know that there is a God that one can lean on, that can help to straighten out our sense of values when so often they seem to be horribly mixed up, that can show to us the examples in history from which we should be taking our guidance. Prime among them, the one that the psalmist never knew, Jesus Christ. The main point is, God cares. That's what the psalmist is saying. How does one get this over to young people? The truth of it, the importance of it. But life isn't all just a going out, life is also a coming in. We talk a good deal about young people in our churches today, and sometimes we seem to forget that there are many people in churches who are not so young. And they also need the feeling of God's care. They need courage. They need faith. They need spiritual foundations. They need the knowledge of the help that can be given to them. There isn't anything that is much more severe to overcome in this world than the loneliness of an elderly person. A person who feels that he has come to the end of the way and nobody cares and there's nothing more that he has to do in life. He has gone out. Life has been a going out to sea, and now he's returning to port and he doesn't like it. Luther Youngdahl tells of an early railroad king in America who became a lonely, ill, unhappy old man. One evening he was sitting on his porch as the sun was going down and he could see the long winding road that was running past his estate. As he looked, his eye caught sight of a barefoot boy dressed in faded overalls, an old straw hat, a patched shirt, a string of fish over his shoulder, and a mongrel dog at his heel. The old man looked and he said to himself, "How did I ever miss taking over that road?" Well, he missed it because very largely the joy that comes to a person when he's coming in depends very largely on what he has put into it going out. I wish I knew the rest of the story. If I ever see Luther Youngdahl, it's one of the first questions I'm going to ask him. But I wonder, did anybody ever tell that elderly man that there is a God in heaven who never intended that any person should come to the end of the road with regrets like that? And that we have a God in heaven who has something for every age that is reserved for that every age. And that there are some things that God has given to every decade of our lives, and one of the richest is left for the elderly. Can't you hear that elderly man pitying himself? As he reminisced over those days when he was such an influence in business and in his community? Is that dreadful feeling that he isn't needed? That he doesn't count anymore? I wonder, did anyone ever tell him that God has reserved for people like him the privilege of not sitting and just watching that boy with his fish walking down the road, but to call to that youngster and to have a talk with him, and to say things that none but the elderly can say. Talk to him about the things that in the long pull do count in this world and the things that don't. Try to give him some concept of the difference between truth and falsehood in this world. Talk to him about the things that don't work and the things that do. And is there any but the elderly that could say, I have been young and now I'm old, yet have I not seen the righteous forsaken? The greatest ministers of this world are those not who are on their way out, but the ones who are coming in. I believe that God reveals the truth to those elderly people, too. He cares enough for that. A truth that they can't get when they're younger. So Dr. Jowett says to a couple of cottagers that lived within shadows of one of the most stately homes in England, "Can you see the castle from here?" They said, "Only in the wintertime. For in the spring of the year and in the summertime, the foliage is so thick we can't see through, but when winter comes and the leaves drops off, that's when we see the castle. So it is with the truth of God. So often it's when the leaves begin to drop off, the truths are revealed that we never saw before. So he preserves our going out and our coming in. And he supports us all the day long through this troublous life until the shadows lengthen and the evening comes. The busy world is hushed. The fever of life is over. And our work is done. Then in his mercy, he grants us a quiet rest and peace at the last through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
We have presented a recording of this morning's worship service from the Shadyside Presbyterian Church, Amberson Avenue and Westminster Place in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Ministers of the church are Dr. Howard C. Scharfe, Dr. James H. Blackwood, and the Reverend Richard M. Cromie. Organist and choir director Russell G. Whitman. Today's sermon by Dr. Scharfe was titled Psalm 121, a psalm assuring us that God cares. Your comments on these services are invited. Address Shadyside Presbyterian Church. Again next Sunday after the 11 o'clock news, be listening for another rebroadcast of the regular worship service from Shadyside Presbyterian Church in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.